Anyway, let's throw it open. If anyone wants to ask anything or talk about anything particular, feel free.
I love your engaging God about the meditation
Yeah.
information you put out, and I I was wondering those for those who have still quite hard time, because for me, I think my mindset is still really chatty, and I was wondering if you have any advice for calming that thoughts and really be still.
It's really just practicing, really. I mean, I think having no agenda helps, in that I just want to come into the presence of God without an agenda that I'm setting. Then I'm trusting and waiting for him to set whatever agenda he wants to have in it. And there are some practical things. Some people like background music to stop all the sounds that interfere. There are quite a number of things I suggested in that meditation sessions, which are, you know, different ways of focusing your mind. Some picturing things, some looking at it from different perspectives. People are different. You know, people who have active minds, you know, sometimes it just helps to slow down the breathing and focus on the name of God. That's one area where you can just take your mind off something onto God and allow that then to develop. It's obviously really difficult to try and stop with your mind running, racing. So you've got to focus it on something else. So focusing it on the name of God, focusing on slowing down your breathing can help getting you to a place of rest where things can open up from there. I mean, I think the key for me is to come into a place of love and allow God as love to begin to engage us and bring that sense of joy and peace, you know, which is what the meditation is about, bringing us to a place of rest. And, you know, when I first started to learn, trying to meditate, you know, if I just sat with an empty mind or a mind not thinking about anything, then it will get filled with something, you know, whether it will be, you know, what I'm doing in the day, or what am I going to do later in the shopping, or all sorts of things. I mean, so many things can come into our minds. So I don't think having an empty mind works. I think having a focused mind works, but focusing it on something positive like the name of God, or a thought about God, or a perspective of God, or just think about love. You know, just start thinking about love and focus your mind on love, then it will begin to flow out of that. You know, I think that some people, you know, the whole thing of emptying your mind is an Eastern philosophy, which is not really actually about biblical meditation. From meditation from a Christian perspective is to fill your mind with thoughts of God. And if you want to enter into something, fill your mind about entering in. Think about it. So if I want to step into the realms of heaven and there's a door open, then I think about the door being open. Then when I'm thinking about it and I can picture the door, then I can step through the door. So it's focus, really. I think, you know, that's the key, is just learning to focus in a way which enables you then to enter into it without the distractions. I don't personally use background music, but I use it myself, but I use background music in most of the activations, because sometimes it just enables that, particularly if the background music is written from a particular creative perspective, which all our background music is written for particular purposes. So there's some written for healing, some written for harmony, some written for engaging the throne room. There's some written about Yod Hey Vav Hey, you know. So, you know, it helps when the intention of the music is deliberately composed to help you engage. You know, but I don't use it myself personally, because I don't need to anymore, because I don't get distracted. because I'm in a conversation with God most of the time. So there isn't an awful lot that can distract me from a conversation with God. So because I'm intent on listening and writing down what he's sharing. If it's learning to listen to God's voice, is I think one of the key elements to being in that meditation state, is that small still voice becomes more clear, and then you can begin to focus and write it out, really. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Lisa, yeah, you got your hand up there. You need to unmute. Yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now, yeah.
Okay, so along the same lines as the meditation, I downloaded all your activations off of YouTube and put them in a little special file, and I'm using those activations to, enter into the heavenly realms. Here's the problem I'm having. You talk about getting yourself in a comfortable position to receive, I guess, and I have to sit in an uncomfortable chair, like I'm in a lecture in college, because I pass out immediately. I can't get past the garden of my own heart before I am completely unconscious, and then I will wake up and I'll be on some other activation because it just rolls one after another, and I get so frustrated by that. Do you have any comments? Is it okay to pass out? Because my soul isn't going anywhere. I'm passing out in the garden of my own heart, and who knows where I'm going when I wake up. Sometimes 50 minutes later.
Yeah. Well, if it's not a blockage in which that is something which is not God inspired, then yeah, look at that and ask God to show you. But in a sense, going into a state of deep rest, which suspends your conscious thoughts, can be that God is taking you into things that you are not consciously able to process yet, and that your spirit will be engaging even though your mind isn't, and eventually your spirit will release the revelation that you're engaging in when you need it. Sometimes when I went into experiences which I couldn't fathom, were too much, and sometimes I completely had no recollection of it, but I knew I encountered something. Later on, sometimes years later, the revelation of that encounter was released. So I wouldn't worry about it. Trust that whatever you're doing in that encounter, God is actually involved and he knows what he's doing. And it may be that he just needs to suspend you for a while. But it's like you're activating, and then almost like your soul can't cope with the activation. So it's sort of going into a state of rest. So, but your spirit does not have to be in that same state. Your spirit doesn't need to sleep and doesn't need to rest. So I always believe that way more is going on spiritually than there is in our soul. But ultimately, you do obviously want some of the experiences to be cognitive so that you can then focus on them. But I wouldn't, in the early stages of it, I wouldn't be over concerned unless, you really feel this is something which the enemy is doing to stop you engaging, which you would sense a real discomfort or a dis-ease in it, which obviously you're not, because you're basically going to sleep or going into a suspended state. So hey, a lot of people can't do that, so they will be looking at, well, how does she do that? Because their mind is racing the other way. So I think it's a matter of just relaxing. Don't try and overanalyze it, but just talk to God when you go into an encounter and just say, if there's something that you want me to know cognitively, can you keep me awake? Or if you want me to go into that state, that's okay. I'm going to surrender to whatever you want, but, just reaffirm to you or give you some, affirmation about what you're doing. But I wouldn't be over concerned about it. Because I know a lot of people have amazing spiritual encounters that they don't understand, even then they have cognitive, and that isn't an awful lot of good either. because then you're trying to, well, what was that about? I don't understand, blah, blah, blah. You know, so sometimes I know God does suspend us so that he can get some deeper things into place that he couldn't do if your mind is in the way. But I don't think that would be a for all time thing, because obviously, you know, if you're going to legislate or you're going to be on your throne and you're going to be doing some things, it does help for you to be engaged and activating it. But once you're able to live in two realms at the same time, or multiple realms at the same time, you don't have to know what your spirit is doing specifically. It is continuing to function in that realm, and your soul is just connected. So whatever I'm doing in that realm right now is flowing into this realm, even though I'm not aware of it. I'm not aware of what I'm doing, but I am aware that I'm connected and that there is a flow. And that's always the key, that something is flowing and you're operating in that flow, whether you know it cognitively or not. And if I chose to engage my consciousness with that realm, which is really easy to do because I've learned how to just shift from being here. Now I can do that and still be aware of here. So I've gone from the suspended state where I'm not aware of the present to I'm here, but I can also describe a realm in heaven where my spirit is. Now I'm able to do both at the same time. So I can still listen, I can still engage, I can still watch what's going on here, but I can describe, let's say, where I might be on the altar or where something might be going on, because I've learned to engage it and still be active here, which I think is part of eventually the process of being able to be aware of both things at the same time without it being distracting or in any way negative. But for me, I do it when I choose to do it. And most of the time, I'm benefiting from what my spirit is doing, but I don't need to know, you know, and knowing wouldn't really benefit me anyway, any more than I'm benefiting now, you know, because a lot of that is where my spirit is ruling and establishing heaven so heaven can manifest through the earth. So my focus is better on the manifestation of it into the earth. Hence, you know, I'm not sitting here having prepared a script for what to share with people because I don't know what I'm going to be asked. But my spirit is already active in that realm and flowing so that I can share the revelation that's coming from that realm rather than me dredging up some answer out of my memory. So I don't have to think about what I'm going to say because it's flowing. And I think that's a positive state to get in that way. But relax, rest. Don't get anxious or concerned over it, because that will make it harder. You know, the more rested you are, the easier it is. But, you know, there may be a reason, and I would ask God to show you. If there is a reason, ask him to show you why you're doing this or why this is happening, and see if there's anything specific that comes, you know, while you're engaging. Because talking to him, you know, you don't have to get into a deep state of rest where you're likely to go to sleep if you just start talking to him. You know, it's just like talk and listen, talk and listen. You know, the meditative states are really to enable us to, in a holistic way, to engage in things at deeper levels of love, joy, and peace. But it all starts with, hey, I can talk to him, he can talk to me, and I'm learning to listen. So ask him. That would be my encouragement. Ask him and see what he says and see what you feel or sense in it, you know. You know, because there's some people, there can be a blockage and the enemy can distract by doing that. And if that's the case, you wouldn't want that to happen. But generally, you would get a sense of, you know, something around it isn't right, rather than just drifting off into a place and waking up later. You know, and your spirit is able to listen to all of what's going on, even if your soul's not listening, you know, in a cognitive way, you know, and your unconscious mind and subconscious mind can still engage even if your conscious mind is disconnected, you know. So nothing's ever really lost. when we engage. There's always something positive to take from it, or later on to receive from it.
Yeah, one time I woke up and I was like, where was I? And I just heard, I guess I heard my spirit say, Matthew 28. You were in Matthew 28.
Okay, that's fair enough.
I was like, well, I don't, okay.
Yeah. But, you know, if you're inquisitive enough, then it's like, okay, God, what was about Matthew 28 were you trying to talk to me about? You know, what was it about? Was it the Great Commission? Was it other aspects of, you know, what Matthew 28 is about? Perhaps, you know, Jesus receiving the authority and power and being seated, you know, above, and, you know, who knows, you know, what can come out of that. You know, so it's always good to, you know, go back. Sometimes God does hide things in the mystery so that we pursue. You know, now my problem is I needed to pursue it because my soul needed to know. You know, when I got to the freedom of my soul does not need to know, then I received experiences beyond what I could have possibly imagined or thought, because now I didn't need them. You know, when I needed them, the agenda was driven by my soul's need for knowledge or for understanding. And when I gave up my own understanding, then I didn't need to know, and he was free to show me. And now I don't need to know most of the time, but when I'm engaged, then that which I do need, I can engage with. And for me, most of my engagements are really around conversation and talking and sharing with God and having relationship and fellowship. And if he wants to show me something or take me into something, he will. And I will go into that, and whatever the reason for that is, will become apparent either there or later. You know, and sometimes I write some of the encounters down and I'm like, I have no idea what it means, but it's okay. I write it down, and if I ever am drawn back to it, then I can go back into it and see if there's more for me to experience without needing always to understand everything, you know. Obviously, you know, if one of my sort of gift is to teach, therefore having something to teach, you do need some awareness of what it is. But, you know, I share some of my conversations because the conversations then provoke things for other people. You know, see, for me, when God speaks to me, it carries the same authority as any scripture, because I write it down and it is scripture to me because God spoke to me. I'm not expecting it to be scripture for anybody else because he didn't speak to anybody else. But if they listen to or read what I write down, then it has within it the capacity to become valid for others should they engage with God and God give them the personal revelation. Otherwise, it's just information. You know, and I don't want to be giving information, but I do want information to lead to revelation as people pursue it and get it from God in that way. You know, and I would not expect people to treat what God says to me as their personal scripture, because that's what God needs to speak to them. And if I can inspire anything for God to speak to people, great. But for me, it carries the same weight as anything that God inspires to be written. And if I would treat it any less than, then I would be missing out on the authority and the power and the things that God has spoken, and maybe then not need to respond to it. If it, well, you know, it's not like the Bible. Well, it is. You know, when God speaks to you, when God speaks to me, it carries just as much weight as the Bible. And the Bible actually wasn't written for us, mostly. It was written to the people of their day, and audience sort of relevance and participation is also important. Now, there are truth that's universal and stuff that are still valid for us, but actually most of what the Bible says needs a framing in our present day, whereas when God speaks to you, he's going to speak to you in the context of your present day, which doesn't need an interpretation mostly, unless something is very, very unclear. You know, generally by going over it and meditating on it, the truth will come from it, that God wants it. do. Now, for me, most of what he talks to me about relates to what I'm doing on a daily basis in my mandates, or things I'm preparing, or things I'm looking for in the future. Therefore, I see the relevance to that, and then that becomes inspirational to me. And when I put it into a PowerPoint or something, more and more of that inspiration gets birthed, and I find more and more things come as I begin to engage it. You know, so I don't treat it lightly. I honor it, really. I honor what God says, and I really want to embrace and engage it in a very practical way. You know, but we're all different, so we all have to find how this works with us in our everyday settings. So, yeah, don't get over concerned over it. I'm sure, you know, it's part of your journey, and you'll come to other stages on your journey where there'll be other things that you connect to and relate to, I'm sure. So, yeah. Okay. Any other questions or things? Yeah, go ahead, Anne.
Okay, hi. I'm going to Lindy Strong's Frequency Healing Conference this week on the west side.
Oh, excellent. Yeah.
It's off pretty soon tomorrow, and anything you compare me, you've met her. She's a hoot.
She's a really good friend. Yeah, I mean, we function on a bench of 3 together, and we've been working together for best part of I don't know, 5-6 years now. So yeah, she's great. And you know, it's depending on how much she goes off tangent, be depending on how much of what she wants to share comes out. But because she's there 5 days, I'm sure she's going to present and engage with some things which are very practical, as well as, you know, illuminatory. And I'm sure she'll do some very practical exercise in it. But she's great, very, very open to question and stuff. So I'm sure you're gonna have a great time.
Yeah, she's going to do a forgiveness seminar too, on forgiveness prayer. So I'm looking forward to that, to see if I can implement that.
Yeah, forgiveness therapy is a whole process in which, you know, it helps people deal with some of the underlying issues in their lives that unforgiveness is rooted into. Not necessarily always deliberately, but just that's how sometimes we deal with trauma and we deal with things. You know, we don't know how to process it, so we bury it, and it can still be there. So, you know, she's developed a whole sort of process around that, which I'm sure will be of benefit to you, without doubt. Yeah, we work quite closely together. Our 2 groups are only about 75 miles away, so yeah, we help each other and encourage each other at various things. And she also works in the community, similar to us, in working with people who are disadvantaged and helping people, as well as they do a lot more of the hands-on ministry stuff, which we're getting into. You know, more we are going to focus more on the hands-on. You know, we've got a number of people now who are trained up in releasing toxic emotions through Carrie Browning's teaching. I think Carrie may well be there in Seattle as well, I think, during the week at some stage. So
I should ask her, because she and I are friends.
Yeah, I think she's, I mean, I was talking to her online last week, and we're going to be doing a conference together, hopefully in Phoenix next year, all around sort of quantum stuff and, you know, quantum faith, I think they're going to call it. So that'll be fun. I can escape the winter weather and end up in Phoenix and find it nice and warm, I would imagine. So yeah, God is making these connections all over the world, actually, and it is really great to find that people are doing things in different ways, but basic same principles. They have different focus, but it's the same real basic principle, and it's great because God then gives us lots of different options of being able to engage with it rather than there's only one way. No, there's multiple ways using the same principles, and people have different focuses within that. But it's very positive. And I do believe a lot of the energy healing and things are being unveiled so that we claim them back and, you know, start functioning as sons, outworking some of these things in our everyday life, rather than, you know, ignoring them. A lot of them is like so much of these type of things, because they've been counterfeited or because they've been used by the so-called New Age, Christians avoid it, right, rather than realizing that they've just using stuff that's our inheritance, you know. So let's claim back the real and the genuine. And for some people, they are, I think, being used by God, even though they don't know God personally, but he's still using them because they're open to help other people using these techniques. And there are some people that necessarily may have an underlying agenda which is not all pure, and you've got to be discerning in it all. And I think the closer you get to the genuine, the easier it is to discern anything which is not. But we shouldn't be afraid of it, or we're afraid of deception and that stuff, because, hey, we got the Holy Spirit, Spirit of truth, to help us. You know, fear, anything that's fear generating, you know, we know isn't coming from God. So those people say, oh, you shouldn't have anything to do with that because it's so dangerous, whatever. Well, that motivation of fear is not coming from God. And we need to be discerning, but without fear.
Yeah, I used to just think people were nuts that did that stuff. And so God's taken me on it.
Yeah. Well, I would have been the same.
Get me more open.
I mean, 20 years ago, we would have done seminars and stuff warning people against it, you know. So God has a sense of humor in using people, really, who, you know, when I look back and think, oh my word, what would my past self think of my present self? Probably not very highly, I would imagine, but that's okay, you know. So yeah, I'm sure you'll have some fun there. Yeah.
I guess that some of it is, you know, you don't want to look for formulas, and that's why I'm with you in that disseminating all the knowledge in different ways is wonderful, because, you know, look at Mike's done this or Ian's done that. Oh, I don't resonate with Ian. He freaks me out. But Mike, you know, we like the same TV shows or something, you know, so but then you look for a formula, and then God just dismantles that and says, no, this is about you and me, and brings you back to that. But the more you see other people, I mean, it's good to resonate with people, but there's that tendency to look for a formula, and which is the old way of thinking, you know?
Yeah, it is. And it's the shortcut, which means we don't have to go through the process, you know, and it really doesn't work because this is relational, you know, and relationship always requires process. There's got to be a relational journey of walking things out together. Otherwise, it isn't relationship, and everything in the kingdom is about relationship. So I always, warning bells go off when I start to see shortcuts or ritual stuff of like, well, say this 5 times and this will open, or do this 25 times and this will open. Okay, that might work for that person because God may have said that to them. But as soon as you try and transpose it into other people and other situations, then you run into it doesn't work. And then you get disappointed, and then hope gets deferred, and then people get disillusioned, and then, oh, none of this works, you know, for me, and it doesn't work, and I tried it. And, you know, at the end of the day, all we need is to focus on relationship, and everything will come out of that relationship. God is not shy of showing us what he wants us to do, you know, but he wants us to be free to realize that he loves us, and our relationship is not based on what we do. It comes from who we are rather than for who we are. And so many people are trying to do things to get their identity, and therefore they'll copy what Ian's doing or what I'm doing, whatever, and think, okay, well, I can be like them. No, everyone has to be like themselves and be comfortable with being like themselves. Otherwise, we do get into performance, and that was what creates formulas, and then formulas don't work ultimately for others. Even if it works for me, I'm not guaranteeing that what I do works for anybody else, but the principles can be applied to find out what works for you if you're willing to practice getting you to the point where you are able to discern and engage. And I think that's part of the key. It's a journey, and everyone's journey is different because everyone started in a set different place. Everyone's got different history. Everyone's got all sorts of things, situations which are different. Therefore, God doesn't have a formulaic way of approaching us. It's a relational way. And therefore, it can be different for everybody. Now, that freaks people out in the religious systems because they want uniformity, because that means everyone's safe. And God never promised to be safe. He's not safe. He's trustworthy, and yes, he's secure, but he's not wanting us to have this safe thing where nothing is ever out of the ordinary. Sometimes he does things suddenly. Sometimes he surprises, and it's okay, in that way. So I would encourage everybody really to find what works for them. Now, again, people will say, "Oh, well, that's very situational," but it's based in love. So you can't go too far wrong if everything you do is motivated by unconditional love. And so there's nothing to be feared. And I think the religious institutions are so frightened that they're going to be deceived, they don't do anything. And Jesus said very clearly, look, why when we're engaging the Father do we think he's going to give us something bad when we're looking for something good? We need to have more trust in God as Father to look after us and protect us than the enemy has to deceive us and to hurt us. And that's a safe place in him. But some of the things he does causes us to risk, to step out, to trust. How do we know that we trust him if we don't step out in that trust? I think God is wanting to bring us to the point where we mature and are willing to step out more and not hold back through fear of getting it wrong. Because, the wrong view of God is, well, if we get it wrong, we need to look out because he won't be very happy with us. He's always smiling and always happy with us because we're his children. He may not be happy with some of the things we do if they affect us negatively or others, but he's always happy with us, and he's always wanting to correct us in a positive discipleship way, not in a negative punishing way. And the more we know him, the more we trust him, because we realize we can trust him. He is faithful. And we can have faith in his faithfulness because he doesn't change. He's the same yesterday, today, forever. And if you've seen Jesus, you've seen the Father. And everything is motivated in love, in reality. So it's awesome. Yeah, Lisa, I think you had your hand up there next.
The Phoenix meeting, do you have dates and location yet? Is it in Phoenix, and do you have a month and day?
I have a sort of preliminary date for Phoenix, which I think is the 6th to the 8th of March. And then I might be doing something in Sacramento with Nancy Cohen in the end of March. And I'm looking potentially to fill in the middle of March. Maybe something in Dallas, again, possibly with Nancy, or Cedar Creek, either end of that trip. So there's a few things which I'm just waiting for people to get back to me with some firm.
Where will the announcement be made? On Facebook, on your Engaging God website? Where would we look?
Both. When we've got something there, then we'll let people know where to connect. Or I'm not organizing it. Carrie's organizing it. So I'm just going to join in with the fun and do whatever she wants me to do, really. But I'm sure it'll be fun. And some of the things with Nancy are more along the restoration of all things line, but I'm waiting for Nancy also to get back. She's presently on a cruise with her husband celebrating her 50th wedding anniversary. So I'm sure she's going to come back blessed and refreshed from that this week. So, yeah. Okay, Jen, yeah.
So, like you mentioned, we are on all different journey, and there are a lot of people who have fear of, oh, you will get deceived if you listen to anything this organization who's tended to be like New Age. That's the perspective where one of my friends coming from. And I was wondering if you have any successful story, because I don't want to, because you talked about a lot about deconstructing your mind, my old mindset. And so I've been going through that, and I really am not afraid to listen to all these other people who has spiritual wisdom and good spiritual principles. And we kind of got into this jam that I was wondering, since I know you have gone through that with a lot of other relationship, so if you can share like successful story, how to maneuver that, because the ultimate goal is not to sacrifice relationship and have reasonable, really good relationship, but not being stuck behind, but move on. And there's other people with like, why are you, criticizing, and it's a little difficult to like maneuver that well.
Sure. I mean, in relationship with people who don't understand, I would not be trying to convince them to understand or even go there, because it's pointless getting into debate or argument if they're trying to do is warn you or coming out of fear. So I don't talk about certain things with certain people simply because it won't be profitable. I want to have discernment in that I say the right things to the right people at the right time when they're ready and when God is working with them. I don't want to force the agenda with people. So I can not engage with people who are being negative or critical, because I don't have to prove a point. So I don't have, the relationship should be for relationship and not about what we're trying to do with that person in that relationship. So I would back off from trying to debate or argue or whatever, and don't tell them what you're doing. It's the easiest thing. Don't tell them, and then they don't know, and then they can't disagree. In some, because it's no point if it just creates conflict and tension. It's pointless doing that. I do personally believe that you can chew the grapes and spit out the pips from truth which is embedded in other things. And there are things that I look at sometimes, or I feel I'm led to engage with, which I know very clearly I've got some things which I don't agree with, but there is some truth embedded into it. And some of that can be helpful because you get a different perspective on that truth when it comes from a different source. But primarily, my source is God. So I'm not looking for other sources of truth. I don't look at the Jewish mysticism sources. I don't read the Zohar or the Kabbalah or any of those things, which I know others do. And that's okay for them. For me, never really felt any desire or drawing to read any of that stuff. For me, if there are mysteries there, then God can tell me directly. I don't need to read a book, which then I'm going to have to go through a whole lot of discernment about, because there's a mixture in it. And so I'd rather drink from a pure source rather than trying to filter an impure source and filter the good out of the bad. So most of what I'm looking to do is to engage with God and let him give me the revelation that I need. And sometimes if there is someone who's done research or has good information that they've researched, I'm not going to go and reinvent the wheel and go through a whole load of research myself when someone else has already done it. But I'm discerning in that research, not just to believe it just because it says, but to engage it and to resonate with it and to see that which I feel is good or helpful and that which isn't, you know. And, you know, there are people I'm connected to who are very much academic and do a lot of really good research, and they take months in that research. Now, I am not going to waste my time spending months doing research when I know they're doing it, and they will eventually publish their stuff that I can use. You know, and for me, that's just makes sense to me. You know, I'd rather spend my time engaging with God relationally than, for instance, learning Hebrew. There's a big thing nowadays about learning Hebrew, and you won't understand the mysteries of God unless you learn Hebrew. It isn't true. You know, it's just not true. God does not speak to me in Hebrew. And even if I understood the language, he wouldn't speak to me in Hebrew because that's not the language that I'm familiar with mostly. Now, I'm not against people learning if they want to learn, but don't learn thinking this is the only way, because you'd be much more better spending the time with God than learning another language. You know, because you're still going to have a relationship with God for you to draw from that other language. And actually, why try and interpret the Bible when you can talk to God and listen to him? You know, it's just another mediation that I'd rather have out the way, personally. You know, and I know people draw stuff out of some of these things, mystical writings, but often some of the things they write, I find that God has already spoken to me about. I just didn't need to get it through that source, you know. And if God wants me to read something, he's quite able to tell me to go and pursue or look at something, you know. And one day I was in the realms of heaven and I was engaging with Enoch, and Enoch said, you know, why don't you read my book, you know, sort of thing. And I'm like, okay. And I read it, tried to read it. Oh, it was so heavy going, you know, and there was no life in it for me. And then, you know, I was talking to God about it. He said, well, I didn't ask you to read it. Just because someone asks you to read something, are you going to do what they say with that? And I'm like, you know, and actually I found it really heavy going. It didn't bring me any life. Not saying that other people can't read it and find all sorts of stuff in it. And there's some truth there, no doubt. But I did it because I felt obliged. And, you know, God really sort of showed me that I don't need to be obliged just because I don't want to upset somebody, or, you know, as one of the cloud of witnesses, it doesn't mean that everything they suggest is coming directly from God. You know, they have their own personality, their own history, and they may, you know, wanted me to understand them better, but it didn't help me at all, you know. And so I just thought, oh, well, I'm not going to do that again. You know, I'm going to be more discerning, and I'm going to make sure that if there is some suggestion, that I'm going to check it out, unless I really feel very clearly that it's something that's definitely God inspiring, you know. So discernment is the key in a lot of this. And there are things I resonate with, and I know, and I find that God will get the information to me one way or another. If he wants me to see something or use something, he will get me to see it. You know, I don't spend a lot of time on Facebook, but when I do, I always find something useful that inspires me or challenges me or encourages me or gets me to pursue. You know, I earlier on today, I was looking at something, and all of a sudden it was like, whoa, I never saw this website before. So I went and had a look at it, and it was just like filled with amazing revelation and huge amounts of research, which is going to save me a lot of time in researching the same information that I really I'm not a great reader. And so, you know, trawling through Josephus, you know, and Eusebius and Tacitus to find historical truth that affirms Jesus, what he said, for me would be not a good use of my time. But for someone who's an academic and loves doing that, great. They feel fulfilled because that floats their boat. I just benefit from their fulfillment, and it blesses me that they've already done the hard work. You know, now for some things that I've probably pursued, hopefully will benefit other people who don't necessarily need to pursue it at the depth I've done, and that can open up a door of revelation for them. And I think we all work together in this, and outwork it. I think just be careful that you don't get motivated by the need to do something because someone else has said it, or that this is the latest fad that we're now going to get into, because there's always going to be the next thing that will be the next thing. And then you'll find it will move on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And we can jump from that thing to the next thing because it is a formulaic thing. Oh, great, this is it now. If anyone's telling you that this is it, it isn't, because it may be part of what God is doing, but it's not going to be the whole thing. You know, and there are principles that we can draw from the things that are going on or people are doing, but without having necessarily to invest fully into everything of it. You know, and I'm very open for God to show me what he wants to show me and unveil what he wants to unveil to me. And therefore I'm quite relaxed about it, and I don't feel in any way under pressure to have to perform or do anything just because someone else is doing it. But, you know, discern, you know, and if you resonate with it, you know, find the truth within it and then leave the rest. But, you know, I'd rather go to the pure source than try and filter out some other source, to be honest, personally. But that's me anyway. Yeah. And you got your hand up there.
So Mike,
Yeah.
I wanted to just touch quickly on what you said about Enoch. So you're saying when you're engaging with even the cloud witness or man in white linen, like he's the one who brought it up, saying, why aren't you reading my book, right? So and then it wasn't really for you. And I was just wondering, because they are there to, like, even like Joseph Sturgeon said, train you. And
they
so
are, but they don't necessarily know everything about us, and they're not God. And Enoch was a person who has spent a lot of time walking in the realms of heaven, but he doesn't know me perfectly like God does. And so the suggestion of this might be useful, when I then tried it, I went to God and he said, well, you didn't really ask me. If you'd asked me, I would have probably said, this is not really going to be the thing for you. So they're not infallible. The cloud of witnesses are not infallible. They're not God, and therefore they may make suggestion. Don't treat what they say like God's voice, because they're not God's voice. Sometimes God can send them with a message, but that message comes through them. It's still not God's voice. The same thing as, like, anyone who prophesies, they're going to prophesy in part. And that's true of the cloud of witnesses or anyone else. I would make sure that I weigh everything against my relationship with God, and don't take anything just because someone said it at total face value. Although, you know, I'm not saying that we should be scared, or well, the cloud of witnesses are going to lead us astray. It didn't lead me astray. It just made me bored reading a book which I really didn't like. You know, that was as much as it was. Now, there are some things I read which I jotted down. I thought, oh, that's interesting. But by and large, I found it heavy going and not much life in it. I find the things that are inspired, that come out of the tree of life, are filled with life, and therefore they provide energy and they activate, and I know that there's life in it. Not everything's like that, you know, and that's why, you know, you don't have to get into anything else that anyone else is doing just because they're doing it. Find that which resonates with you and pursue that. I think is the key.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you.
All right.
I don't know if we have time for this one, but I was reading Revelation about the two witnesses,
Yeah.
I know you believe that was the fall of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile the two witnesses and what they did there and the whole fire coming out of their mouth and all that stuff?
Okay. I mean, again, it's a very symbolic book written in apocalyptical language, and it wasn't meant to be taken literally. So those two witnesses were not supposed to be taken literally. So there are different levels of revelation of the two witnesses that you can find to give you figurative. So there's a figurative level. So you could say that those two witnesses were the old and the new covenants coming together in one new man. So they were bringing that which was revealed and the shadows and types, and now bringing them into revelation within the truth that was revealed. So again, what they were doing was giving people an opportunity of embracing what Jesus had warned. So don't get stuck in Jerusalem, basically, and giving people in Jerusalem an opportunity of responding to Jesus. And that in one sense, was the key. What do witnesses do? They witness to something which is the truth. And they were trying to bring those people that Jesus had warned that this is what's going to happen to you. If you don't follow the truth, you end up in outer darkness outside of the covenant blessing and protection of God, and you're going to end up in trouble. So there's an element to it which is really talking about it in that way. So when you're talking about fire, what does fire represent? The purification and refining of words that can bring change and transformation to us. So there's always a spiritual significance to something. If you were to say, well, who were those? Were there two literal people who you could say were representing of those? Well, you could say one would be Peter and one would be Paul, who were speaking to the Jewish people and the Gentile people. So, there's the symbolic nature of what was going on during that period that eventually got outworked, practically, so, and I'm just giving you some examples. I'm not saying that's the truth or not the truth. I'm just saying that, don't take everything literally. Are you going to take, a dragon with 12 horns or, 7 heads? Are you going to take it literally? Well, it's not literal. It's symbolic of Rome, which had 7 hills. And it was also symbolic of the Caesars, who it said there were 5 that had been, and then there was 1 that was temporary, and then there was 1 that was going to come. And when you look in history, you can see all who those people were. But if you take it figuratively, is there an illustration of something? Maybe. If you take it literally, you're going to run into huge problems, because it's not a literal dragon. It's not a literal, 7 heads. It's not a literal that, because it's really very symbolic. But they didn't have a problem understanding the symbolism 2,000 years ago because they were immersed in it. Today, we try to read it through the filter of our modern language, and particularly if there's a futurist approach, it's all trying to interpret this as, oh, the newspaper is saying this. So you'll get, I don't know, let's say you get some company comes out and they have a dragon as their logo. I'll guarantee you that the futurists will take that and they'll be assigning some antichrist beast symbolism to it in the present day. And they do it all the time. So, in my, eschatology history, when I was a kid and I was interested in eschatology, it was all in the 70s. It was all, late great planet Earth stuff. And it was Russia. Russia was the thing, Gog and Magog, and it's all going to come from the north, and they're all breeding millions of horses because they're all going to ride down, figuratively, no, literally, what they were saying, they're all going to ride on Israel. They're going to ride down from Russia, from the north. Well, none of it came about, and then it was whatever the Russian president, and then some of them, oh no, it's all about Rome, and it's going to be the reformed Roman Empire of the common market. And there's 12 nations. And when 12 nations form, that is going to be this. Well, there's 27 nations at the moment, including us, until Brexit gets done. And you know, and none of it was true. It was all people trying to read into something using the modern day papers to give them insight, and none of it was true. And the same really would apply to the two witnesses and any other, the 144,000, which would be those, you know, symbolic of 12 by 12 and the 12 of authority. And it's a symbolic number. It doesn't mean literally 144,000. But there were thousands who were rescued out of Jerusalem, who were believers, who were those who were the faithful remnant within Israel, who did represent that. And they were mostly those who were Jewish believers. And they were rescued out of Jerusalem because they recognized what Jesus said, and they ran at the right time. It's just so many people try and literalize it that it becomes, you know, nonsense really, because, you know, you can't take it literally. And which bits
Well,
do you
out
take
of
literally and
being a
which bits
Christian
don't
for
you?
40 years,
Yeah.
25 of those years was spent trying to figure out how it was literally true.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a dismantling of my mind, but that's been a lot of time I was taught. I mean, I went to Chuck Smith's church, you know,
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
70s.
Oh,
So
yeah. You
and John
would.
Wimber. So it was, yeah.
Yeah. But a friend of mine online called Mike Sullivan, he went to Chuck Smith's church, and he went to the Bible college, and he did the whole 9 yards, but God took him on a journey through it to show him over a period of time that it didn't add up, you know, and he was uncomfortable about certain things that didn't add up. Then he pursued it and realized the whole thing didn't add up, and then God took him on a journey from futurist to sort of partial preterist, and then further on and took him through it, you know. And he met people like David Chilton and talked to them, and, you know, he's got a long history with it. You know, I just read his testimony of how God took him from, you know, being a dispensationalist, you know, brought up in Chuck Smith's church, you know, to being where he is now. And it's a very interesting journey. And I've been on my own journey in it. You know, back in 1980s, when I got baptized in the Spirit, the first bit of deconstruction that God did with me was to deconstruct my eschatology. I had no idea of anything other than that there was a futurist, you know, dispensational view. That was what I was brought up with. That's what I believed to be true. I knew, you know, what the, you know, third toe on the beast was all. I mean, you know, all of the stuff. And, you know, I got baptized in the Spirit, and God, when he started to communicate to me directly, rather than before, I had no real personal interaction with him. The first thing he said was, you need to understand the kingdom of God and covenant, and I'll teach you. So I didn't go and read anyone's books. I didn't know anybody or know any other books. You know, I'm in the backwater town which doesn't have a Christian bookshop. You know, this is back in the 80s. I had no access to anything. So I went to the Bible, and I said, okay, well, you're going to need to teach me. So I went through all of it over 3 years, and he taught me. And he brought me to a place where I was ready at that point to embrace. If it had tried to take me any further, I probably wouldn't have been able to embrace it at that point. So I embraced what I could embrace, and then the journey continued. And, you know, over the last 5 or 6 years, the deconstruction process that's deconstructed, you know, what Jesus was talking about, that went beyond the AD 70 into the sort of what he was talking about in Gehenna and all those things. All of a sudden, it was just like, why did I never see that before? Because I couldn't see it until I could see it. And I wasn't ready to see it. And if I had tried to see it, or God had tried to force it on me, I would have probably really struggled. But he softened me up by encounter and encounter and encounter. And the love that I experienced in the encounters made it really obvious that what I thought about him wasn't true, and it couldn't be true, because he wasn't like the God I thought he was like. So everything got deconstructed from that process. But it's one of those things that, you know, until recent times, when I'm looking at the restoration of all things and realizing that it comes up against what people's expectation of the future is, I've stayed away from most of that teaching for the last 30 years. I mean, in the last 30 years, I only ever taught it, I think, once here. And that was a very simple thing of, looking at the different views of the millennium and that sort of stuff. I've never felt the necessary to really put it into a context, but now I found the context, I do realize that it does hinder people. And if you think that the planet is going to be destroyed by fire, it gives you very little incentive to have any stewardship of it as sons. Because, well, what's the point? It's all going to be destroyed by fire. We're going to have a new heavens and a new earth. Well, as soon as you realize that the heavens and the earth were referring to the temple, which was symbolic of the Jewish system, you realize we're already in the new heavens and new earth, and the new Jerusalem, we already are. Everything then begins to be now, not the future. And we can embrace and see our sonship is to be at work now in the process of restoration and seeing creation's groan answered, so that creation will be set free as we're free. And if we're in fear for the future, then we're never going to bring anything positive into it. So it is a process that I think a lot of people go through. If people have never been into that, then praise God, they won't have to go through the deconstruction, But a lot of people were, because it was the hot topic, has been the hot topic for years and years in the evangelical community, because they haven't got anything else to talk about. Because there's just doom and gloom, and they've got no hope for the future of the kingdom of God filling the earth, other than in some future rendition of that if Jesus comes back physically and does it with Israel. And all of that whole thing, all of those messages, rapture, dispensationalism, millennialism, a two-part nature of an earthly people and a heavenly people, all of it came from the same fruit of the poison tree, brethrenism. And I happen to have been brought up in that. So I'm fully aware of the roots of it and realize that all of that comes from the same source. And, the reality is all of it was developed to explain away what God actually was wanting to do. So I understand the source of it, but I also understand how powerful the indoctrination is on it, and how difficult it is for people to get free from it because of the pressure. I mean, particularly in the US. I mean, in the US, it's much worse in the UK. Over here, no one really cares what you believe in that sense, and no one really is going to fall out over whether you believe Jesus is coming here, there, or anywhere. But in the US, it's a major issue that if you come out against it, you're going to suffer in the Christian press or on the internet by, which is why I encourage people, you don't necessarily need to advertise the fact that you're going through a process, because it can be a pressure put on you to conform, or warnings, oh, this is a warning, you're leaving orthodoxy, and those people are genuinely convinced that this has been the orthodox position from the beginning, when it's 220, 30 years old, if that, but they are indoctrinated. I was indoctrinated by it. It took God to deconstruct me, years ago, but also presently, to change my thinking on it. But I don't go out to try and pick an argument over it with people. I answer questions when people ask them. I have done a session on it in the Engaging God program. I will probably need to do a session in restoration, looking at how does it relate to the restoration of all things and what we're expecting, but it's not something I'm particularly personally bothered about, because at the end of the day, if we were to walk out our journey with God day by day, then it doesn't really matter ultimately, unless it's hindering that daily walk. If God asks you to do something and then you're, oh no, there's no point doing that because this is going to happen, then that will be worth dealing with. But by and large, to be honest, let's just get on with living day by day, fulfilling our destiny, outworking it, and stay away from controversy, if you can, because it won't help. And well-meaning people will probably give you grief over it, and why put yourself in a position to get grief? I'm in a position of needing to do some of these things, I wouldn't be doing it in my everyday daily choices if I didn't have a mandate for a wider sphere, which I do. So, you know, I do have to go through it, but I'm not bothered by people being negative, because it ain't going to affect me. When God's positive about me, people can be as negative as they want. You know, that's okay. You know, I can bless them and love them, and, you know, and let God deal with it, you know, and hopefully he'll bring them to a place of revelation. But that's up to him. It's not my job to change people's minds. You know, that's God's, you know, he can deconstruct, he can renew our minds. I'm not going to try and change someone's thinking over these issues, because I know how difficult it is. Well, I was in India recently, and I had no intention of talking about anything which was controversial, really, other than, you know, the love of God and engaging in love and sonship. But people just kept asking more and more questions. So in the end, I had to do a session on eschatology just because there were so many questions. So I did, but it wasn't what I really wanted to do, you know, but I felt God say, look, if you don't deal with this issue, they're just going to have so many questions around this, they're going to miss everything else you talk about. So, you know, I had to deal with it, and I did. And some people, they're okay. And some people were so challenged because their whole mindsets and belief systems had been composed around this whole view of futurist perspective of everything, you know. So I think, you know, we are in that place where I do believe God wants us to embrace the present and live in the fullness of the present without being concerned. You know, Jesus said, look, don't worry, seek first the kingdom today. You know, tomorrow you'll deal with tomorrow, deal with today. And I think if we stick to that, I think, you know, mostly a lot of this stuff will not be a problem, you know, unless, you know, you've got a mandate to do anything around it, then yeah, you're going to have to face that it may be difficult with some people who won't understand, you know. But I won't argue with people or debate with people over it. I just say, look, this is what I believe this is what the Bible says. If you want to disagree, fine, yeah, disagree, you know, that's okay. You know, you're not going to offend me by disagreeing. Anyway, all right, okay, I better leave it there.
Thank you.